Captain Nolan Hayes thought his mission to Viora 7 would be routine reconnaissance. Then he met her, a regal alien princess who looked like she stepped from a celestial painting. When he joked, "Will anyone even wed me?" her response tilted his world on its axis. Her whispered "maybe me" carried weight far beyond flirtation, hinting at cosmic stakes neither could yet imagine. Nolan Hayes operated within defined parameters. His world consisted of checklists, mission protocols, and the comforting weight of a pulse rifle. Prophecies and celestial myths never appeared in his tactical briefings, and he preferred it that way. The official documentation for Viora 7 described a standard Class 3 reconnaissance: survey atmospheric conditions, catalog flora and fauna, and avoid contact with indigenous populations. The file mentioned nothing about legends. From orbit, the planet presented itself as a spectacle of impossible colors. It was a world where physics seemed to play by different rules, with waterfalls that flowed upward and forests that glittered like cut glass. To Nolan, this beauty felt calculated, a visual distraction masking potential threats. He'd seen planets use their grandeur as a weapon before. He dismissed the native stories of luminous visitors as primitive attempts to explain natural phenomena they couldn't understand. His squad shared this skepticism. Their dry, technical humor was a familiar shield against the unnerving silence of alien worlds. Their landing craft settled in a valley where the light itself fragmented. Prismatic arcs crisscrossed the sky without rain, and the ground shimmered with a soft internal luminescence. The air carried a scent like ozone and something sweetly organic. Nolan's instruments registered stable atmospheric pressure and breathable air, but his sensors flickered with an energy signature they couldn't classify, a frequency that hummed just beyond the edge of measurement. The awe was a physical pressure in his chest, an unwelcome emotion for a soldier on duty. He needed to break the tense silence to reassert the normalcy of their mission. He let out a low breath, his gaze scanning the impossible rainbows. The words were a deflection, armor against the sublime vista. "Will anyone even wed me?" he murmured to the empty, sparkling air, a throwaway line meant for his team's ears, a piece of the cynical banter that kept them grounded. Then a voice answered from the heart of the light. It was not an echo. It was a clear, melodic tone that seemed to originate from the shimmering air itself. The world, vast and overwhelming just a second before, collapsed. Every sense focused. The thousand rainbows, the humming energy, the glittering forest, it all vanished from his awareness. His world narrowed to the source of that sound, a single point in the fractured light where something impossible was beginning to form. The light did not part so much as it coalesced. It gathered itself from the shimmering air, drawing substance from the fractured rainbows, and began to form a shape. It was a process of solidification, like watching smoke resolve into marble. Her figure emerged with an impossible grace, not stepping into existence but becoming real within it. She did not walk from the shadows because this world seemed to have none. She was born from its very essence, from the brilliance at the valley's heart. She was tall and held herself with a posture that spoke of a lifetime of authority, an innate regality that needed no crown. Her skin carried a subtle, pervasive lavender glow, as if lit from within by a gentle, perpetual twilight. The robes that draped her form were not mere fabric. They appeared to be spun from captured starlight and the deep violet of a nebula, shifting and shimmering with her every slight movement. She was utterly alien, a being of light and thought given form, and her eyes held a depth that felt cosmic. To look into them was to see not just consciousness but a swirling, ancient intelligence, galaxies of unspoken history and intent. Nolan's training was a klaxon in his mind. His hand twitched toward the rifle at his side. Every protocol screaming at him to assess, to categorize, to treat this as a potential hostile contact. His squad behind him was a wall of tense silence, their own weapons held at the ready, fingers resting near triggers. Yet a deeper, quieter instinct held him still. It was a feeling that defied his tactical manuals, a sense of awe that overrode alarm. This was not an attack. It was an arrival. She moved toward him, and her confidence was a tangible force. It felt ancient, as if she had walked these valleys for millennia. Yet it was also completely present, focused entirely on him in that moment. Her gaze found his, and a small, cryptic smile touched her lips. It was an expression that acknowledged his throwaway joke, the fragile human armor of his words, but it also saw straight through it to the unsettled man beneath. She understood the deflection for what it was. Her voice, when she spoke, was the same melodic tone that had answered him, now given a source. It was clear and measured. I am Lara, she said, of the Valoran dynasty. The title meant nothing within his frame of reference, a data point with no file attached. It was a statement of identity, not a threat. Then her eyes softened almost imperceptibly, and she repeated the words, lower this time, a secret for him alone, maybe me. The two syllables hung in the luminous air between them. They were not playful or flirtatious. They carried a profound and unsettling weight, a seriousness that transformed his cynical remark into something momentous. It was not an answer to his question. It felt more like she was posing a question of her own to the universe, testing a possibility she had seen written in the fabric of things. In that instant, the carefully outlined mission parameters, the reconnaissance, the non-contact protocols, the strict observational mandate, dissolved into complete irrelevance. They were rules for a simpler reality, and he had just stepped far beyond its borders. Lara's guidance unveiled a world far beyond their initial scans. She led them away from the prismatic valley into the crystalline forests, where towering trees were not wood and leaf, but intricate lattices of living mineral. They refracted the twin moon's light into shifting patterns that danced across the ground, and their leaves hummed with a soft, harmonic vibration when touched by the wind. The cities they passed were not built upon the land but grown from it. Spires of glowing crystal rose from the earth in fluid, organic curves, their structures woven together like frozen music. There were no seams, no signs of construction. It felt less like architecture and more like a natural extension of the planet's soul. She spoke as they walked, her voice a steady narrative against the backdrop of wonder. She told of her people's long history, a chronicle not of conquests and empires but of harmony and custodianship. Yet there was a weight to her words, a gravity that settled over the group. Her history lessons were not just stories. They were context. They hinted at a depth of time and responsibility that felt immense, a hidden current running beneath the planet's beautiful surface. Then she mentioned the core. She spoke of a unique energy signature that pulsed deep within Viora 7, a rhythm that sustained everything they saw. Her description was not technical but reverent. She called it the planet's heart, the source of all its life and the stabilizing force that allowed for such impossible beauty. It was the reason the light behaved as it did, the reason the forest sang. Nolan listened, and a cold knot tightened in his stomach. His own instruments had logged that exact energy reading the moment they entered orbit. The ship's computer had classified it as an unexplained geological anomaly, a curiosity for the scientists back home to puzzle over. A data point. To her, it was the heart of her world. Her tone shifted then, and the warmth left her voice. Her eyes, usually so full of that swirling galactic depth, hardened. She spoke of others, not by name but by their intent. She described those who had come before, not with curiosity, but with a hunger to claim the source. Her words were careful, but the warning in them was unmistakable. They did not seek to understand the heart. They sought to possess it, to sever it from the world it sustained and use its power for their own ends. The flicker in her gaze was not fear, but the fierce, protective anger of a guardian. In that moment, the mission objective tilted on its axis for Nolan. It was no longer about passive observation, about cataloging resources and reporting back. The sterile language of his briefing collapsed. He wasn't just documenting a planet. He was being shown something priceless and vulnerable. The objective shifted, silently and completely, from observation to protection. That evening, he made his scheduled report to command. His voice was calm, professional. He confirmed their landing, described the stable atmosphere, the non-hostile environment. He mentioned the unusual mineral compositions, the light refractive properties of the flora. He logged everything by the book. But he omitted the contact. He said nothing of Lara, nothing of the Valoran, and nothing of the planet's heart. The words sat on his tongue, and he consciously chose to swallow them. He was making a choice no soldier should ever make. He was filtering intelligence. He was lying by omission to protect a world, and the princess who was its guardian, from the very people he served. The personal stake was no longer growing. It had taken root, and it was already compromising his duty. The peace of the crystalline forest shattered with the sound of rending metal. It was not the gentle hum of an engine, but the brutal roar of a forced atmospheric entry. 3 ships, angular and scarred from countless battles, tore through the veil of Viora 7's sky. They did not descend with the careful precision of Nolan's landing craft. They plummeted, their thrusters screaming, leaving dark, ugly contrails across the pristine expanse. Their arrival was an act of violence, a brutal tear in the planet's serene fabric, the absolute antithesis of Lara's graceful emergence from the light. They were human vessels, a fact that made their hostile posture feel like a deeper betrayal. Their hulls were pitted and scorched, bearing an insignia Nolan recognized immediately from intelligence briefings, the jagged red claw mark of the Grey Corsairs. They were outlaws, mercenaries who operated outside of any jurisdiction, known for their ruthlessness and their specialization in acquiring high-value assets by any means necessary. The lead ship's ramp slammed down into the iridescent grass before the craft had fully settled. Figures clad in matte black combat armor descended, their movements efficient and predatory. They fanned out with practiced ease, their rifles, bulkier, more heavily modified than standard issue, sweeping the area. At their head walked their commander. He removed his helmet, revealing a face etched with the cold pragmatism of a man who viewed the universe as a series of transactions. This was Rennick. His eyes scanned the scene, dismissing the breathtaking alien beauty, ignoring Nolan and his visibly tense squad. His gaze locked onto Lara. He spoke with a chilling, rehearsed efficiency, his voice devoid of any warmth or negotiation. "We are here for the artifact. Surrender it immediately and we will depart without further conflict." He phrased it as a demand, not a request. He spoke of the planet's heart as if it were a piece of misplaced equipment, an object to be retrieved. He entirely dismissed the Valerans' existence, their history, their claim to their own world. They were an inconvenience, not a people. Lara did not respond with the diplomacy of a princess. She stood her ground and her posture shifted from regal to defiant. Her voice, when it came, did not plead or negotiate. It rang with a pure clarion authority that seemed to vibrate in the very air. "You trespass on a world that is not yours. You speak of a legacy you cannot comprehend. You will leave, now." There was no question in her tone. It was an order. As she spoke, the air around her began to change. The faint lavender glow that always surrounded her intensified, becoming a visible corona of light. The shimmering quality of the atmosphere around her deepened, the light fracturing and bending as if seen through intense heat. A latent power, previously only a hinted suggestion, now vibrated palpably around her, a contained storm waiting for a trigger. Nolan and his squad were caught in a tense, silent standoff. Their rifles were still lowered, but their hands were tight on the grips. They were positioned between two hostile forces, the mercenaries with their obvious brutal firepower, and the alien princess who was now emanating an energy they could not quantify. The simple reconnaissance mission was gone, erased in an instant. They were now participants in a confrontation with stakes that felt exponentially larger than a single planet. Rennick's cold eyes narrowed, assessing the new variable. He glanced from Lara's glowing form to Nolan's squad, calculating odds. His expression made one thing perfectly clear. His men were not here for a prolonged fight or a conquest. This was not an invasion. It was the extraction. They were here for a single, specific prize, and they were prepared to carve through anything in their path to secure it. The simplicity of their objective made them all the more dangerous. Rennick's patience was a thin veneer over a core of pure avarice. Negotiation was a formality he had already dismissed. When Lara's refusal hung in the air, her defiance clear, he gave a single sharp nod to his men. It was not a signal to advance. It was a command to eradicate the obstacle. The mercenaries opened fire without hesitation. Brilliant lances of plasma streaked across the clearing, a storm of superheated energy meant to overwhelm and destroy. The sound was a deafening crackle roar that drowned out the forest's hum. Nolan's squad reacted instantly, diving behind the crystalline formations that offered meager cover. Their defensive position was a textbook setup, but it was designed for a firefight against a peer opponent, not a concentrated alpha strike from superior numbers. The mercenaries fanned out, their advance methodical and ruthless. Chips of glowing crystal exploded around the soldiers as plasma bolts chewed away their cover. They were pinned, their return fire increasingly desperate, their position being systematically overrun. Lara did not join their retreat. She did not seek shelter. As the soldiers scrambled for cover, she stepped forward. She moved directly into the line of fire, placing herself between the advancing mercenaries and Nolan's beleaguered squad. Her robes billowed in the energy-charged air, But her stance was unshakable. She raised her hands, palms open, not in surrender but in invocation. The forest answered. The ambient light of the clearing, the glow from the trees, the very luminescence of the air, it all seemed to draw inward toward her. For a heartbeat the world dimmed. Then a barrier erupted from the ground before her. It was not a shield of metal or energy field. It was a wall of solidified brilliance, a vertical plane of pure, humming light that looked as solid as diamond. It thrummed with a deep, resonant frequency that could be felt in the bones. The incoming plasma fire, which had been moments from shredding the squad's position, slammed into the luminous barrier. The bolts did not deflect or explode. They were absorbed. Each impact was met with a ripple of light across the shield's surface, a brief, intense flare that vanished as the energy was swallowed whole. The wall hummed louder with each impact, vibrating with the immense contained power it was steadily absorbing. It was a perfect, impenetrable defense. The mercenary onslaught faltered. Their confident barrage stuttered into stunned silence. They stared, their weapons lowering slightly at the impossibility before them. This was not technology. It was not a force field generated by a portable emitter or ship-based projector. It was a phenomenon. It was a power pulled directly from the world itself, channeled through the will of a single being. It defied every principle of physics and combat doctrine they understood. Nolan watched from behind the scant cover, his own rifle forgotten in his hands. He saw her standing there, back straight, arms upheld, holding back a storm with nothing but her will. The lavender glow around her was incandescent, a corona of raw power. The serene princess by the lake, the curious woman who asked about human love, was gone. In her place stood a protector of immense and terrifying capability. He was not just falling for a person. He was witnessing the true nature of a force of nature, a guardian whose power extended far beyond any title or throne, and whose strength was as deep and ancient as the world she defended. The silence after the shield's power faded was heavy, thick with the scent of charged air and the stunned disbelief of the mercenaries. The immediate danger had passed, but a deeper, more profound tension now filled the clearing. The secret was out. The demonstration of power made evasion impossible. Lara looked at Nolan, her luminous gaze holding his, and he saw the resignation in her eyes. The time for half-truths and omitted reports was over. She led him a short distance from the others to a grove where the crystalline trees formed a natural, hushed chamber. Her voice was low, stripped of its earlier defensive energy, and carried the weight of a confession. She began to explain the source of the power the Corsairs had come to claim. It was not, as their intelligence likely suggested, a rare mineral deposit or a powerful alien weapon left behind by some vanished civilization. That was a materialistic view, a misunderstanding of its fundamental nature. She called it a fragment of the Star Forge. The name itself felt ancient, heavy with implication. She described it not as an object that was created, but as a piece of something that had always existed, a sliver of the primordial energies that had sparked creation itself. It was not inert. It was alive in a way that defied biological classification, a conscious, pulsing nexus of potentiality. It was a relic, but a living one. Its connection to Viora 7 was not geological. It was symbiotic. The fragment was the planet's true heart, and the planet was its vessel. They sustained one another in a perfect ancient balance, and this bond extended to her people, specifically to the Valerin royal bloodline. They were not its owners. They were its guardians. A sacred duty passed down through generations, a responsibility to protect the fragment, not just for their world, but from anyone who would misuse its unimaginable power. She explained its capabilities with a sobering clarity. In the right hands, its energy could nurture life on a galactic scale, terraform dead worlds, heal broken systems. It was a tool for builders and creators. But in the wrong hands, it was the ultimate weapon. Its power could unravel the fabric of reality itself, unmake solar systems, and rewrite the laws of physics to suit a tyrant's will. It was not a prize. It was a key to ultimate power, and Commander Rennick and his ilk saw it only as a means to shatter the galaxy's fragile balance and build a new order atop the rubble. Nolan listened, and the ground beneath his feet felt less solid. His entire framework for understanding the mission disintegrated. This was not a simple shift in objective from observation to protecting a single planet. His soldiers' pragmatism, his entire worldview built on tangible threats and achievable goals, collided with a responsibility of cosmic scale. The stakes were no longer the preservation of Viora 7's unique ecosystem, or even the safety of its people. The survival of the fragment meant the stability of reality as he knew it. Its loss would be an extinction-level event for countless worlds. The mission was no longer his. He was now part of something infinitely larger, a stand against a darkness that wanted to consume everything. Their refuge, a sheltered alcove deep within the singing forest, felt secure against the mercenaries. But the true threat wasn't outside their perimeter. It was already inside the circle of trust. Nolan noticed it first as a subtle wrongness, an inconsistency in behavior that pricked at his soldiers' instincts. Private Jenkins, the youngest member of his squad, was off. His movements were too quick, too sharp. During their hushed strategy discussions, he stayed on the edges, his gaze fixed on the ground or scanning the tree line with a nervous intensity that felt more like guilt than vigilance. When Nolan's eyes met his, Jenkins flinched, looking away as if burned. His replies to direct questions were clipped, defensive. It was the demeanor of a man holding a live grenade with the pin pulled, trying desperately not to let anyone see. Lara saw it more clearly. Her perception cut through the human layers of anxiety and posturing. She watched him for a quiet moment, her head tilted as if listening to a frequency the rest of them couldn't hear. She moved to Nolan's side. Her voice a low murmur meant only for him. "He conceals a fracture in his spirit," she said, her luminous eyes serious. "The deception clings to him like a shadow. For the safety of all, you must confront the truth he holds." Her solution was direct, born of a culture where the safety of the whole outweighed the discomfort of the one. She saw a leak in their defenses and advocated plugging it immediately and without ceremony. Nolan resisted. His entire professional life was built on a foundation of procedure. He argued for caution, for gathering evidence, for following the established rules of engagement and military justice. A soldier was entitled to a fair process, to a defense. He believed in the chain of command, in the system he had served for over a decade. It was a system designed for order, for fairness, to prevent rash judgments that could destroy a good soldier's life based on a mere suspicion. He wanted to believe there was a logical explanation, a stress-induced panic, anything but the unthinkable. But the system he trusted had already failed. It had been breached long before they ever set foot on Viora 7. While Nolan argued for protocol, Mara, ever pragmatic, was already acting. She had been monitoring their local comms for any sign of the Corsairs scanning their frequency. What she found was not an external signal. It was a faint encrypted data stream originating from within their own secured area, piggybacking on a low-power emergency band. The transmission was tight, professional, and it was emanating from Jenkins's location. It wasn't a voice communication. It was a steady, silent drip of data, their positional data, their numbers, their equipment status, being fed directly to the enemy. The discovery landed like a physical blow. The betrayal was a cold knife in the gut, but it was more than a personal wound. Jenkins was their communications specialist. He knew their frequencies, their encryption keys, their every tactical advantage. He was a walking security breach. His actions weren't just a betrayal of trust. They were a deliberate act of sabotage that carved a fissure right through the heart of their only defense. The sanctuary of the forest was gone. They were exposed from within, and the man they were supposed to protect was the one holding the door open for the enemy. The confrontation happened away from the others, in a small grove where the humming of the leaves was the only witness. Nolan didn't shout. He simply laid out the evidence, his voice flat and heavy. He held up the comms scanner, the silent, blinking light that marked the origin of the data stream. He didn't need to accuse. The truth was a physical presence between them. Jenkins didn't try to deny it. The defensive posture, the nervous energy, it all collapsed. His shoulders slumped and the tough facade of the soldier crumbled into dust. He broke. It wasn't a calculated breakdown or a performance. It was the raw, unfiltered unraveling of a man who had been pushed far beyond his limits. The fear that had been a live wire in him now poured out, a torrent of shame and pure terror. He was not a willing traitor. He was a prisoner of an impossible situation, a hostage to a circumstance he never asked for. The story spilled out of him in choked, broken sentences. The Grey Corsairs hadn't just found them by chance. They had planned this. Before the squad ever left their home port, the mercenaries had done their homework. They had identified the weakest link, the soldier with the most vulnerable connections back home. Jenkins had a younger sister. She lived with their mother on a remote Earth colony, a small, poorly defended settlement on the frontier. The Corsairs had agents there. They sent him a message, a simple, brutal ultimatum accompanied by a live feed. The message was clear: provide continuous tactical data on the squad's position and movements, or a trigger would be pulled from light years away. His choice was a nightmare with no right answer. Betray his team, the people who trusted him with their lives, or condemn his own family to death. It was his oath to his unit versus the blood ties that defined his very existence. Lara listened, her expression unreadable. When Jenkins finished, slumped against a crystalline tree trunk, she turned to Nolan. Her solution was as direct and stark as the problem itself. Her people understood leverage. Remove the external threat, she stated, her voice calm and devoid of malice. If the ones holding the weapon are gone, the weapon cannot fire. The leverage disappears. The problem is solved. It was a clean, logical equation. Eliminate Commander Rennick and his mercenaries, and Jenkins's family is safe. It was the swift, decisive action of a ruler protecting her domain. Nolan looked at Jenkins, who was now just a terrified young man, weeping quietly into his hands. He didn't see a traitor. He saw a victim. He saw a soldier who had been broken by a choice no one should ever have to make, a man whose loyalty had been weaponized against him. His own command philosophy, the very core of his leadership, rebelled against Lara's calculus. "We don't kill our own," Nolan said, his voice low but firm, his gaze locked on hers. "Not like this, not unless there is absolutely no other choice." He was drawing a line, not just between right and wrong, but between two different ways of seeing the universe. Hers was a perspective of necessary, decisive action for the greater good. His was a belief in the system, in the possibility of redemption, in the idea that a soldier's value wasn't erased by a single, coerced failure. This was the choice. It was no longer about Jenkins. It was a test of Nolan's leadership, his human morality pitted against Lara's alien, pragmatic nature. Their new and fragile alliance, forged in awe and a shared purpose, now faced its first true crisis. The fate of a broken man hung in the balance, and the decision would define the soul of their partnership. To secure the fragment, they had to go to it. Remaining on the surface was a defensive posture, a reaction to the Corsair's aggression. Lara understood that true protection meant moving toward the heart of the power, not away from it. She led them away from the shimmering forests, toward a formation that looked like a mountain of pure fused crystal. There was no door, no visible entrance. She placed a hand upon its smooth, cool surface, and a section of the crystal seemed to dissolve, revealing a downward sloping passageway that glowed with a soft, internal light. The descent began. The path was not carved but grown, a natural spiral of glowing crystal that wound deep into the planet's crust. The air changed with every step, growing thicker, heavier. It was not a pressure on the lungs, but a tangible energy that hummed against the skin, a static charge that raised the hairs on their arms. The very stone around them seemed alive. It pulsed with a slow, rhythmic light, a gentle thrumming that resonated up through the soles of their boots. It felt less like walking through a tunnel and more like moving through the vein of a sleeping giant. The walls were not inert rock. They were warm to the touch, and intricate patterns of light flowed within them like liquid electricity. It was a silent, breathing world beneath the world. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit echoed down the crystalline corridor. The mercenaries had not been deterred by the labyrinthine passage. Their heavy footfalls and shouted commands were a harsh foreign noise in the sacred quiet, a constant reminder that their fragile lead was shrinking with every moment. Rennick's obsession was a relentless engine, driving his men forward without caution. The spiral path finally opened up, and they stepped out into the sanctum. It was not a room built by hands. It was a vast, impossible cavern that stretched into a darkness too deep for their lights to penetrate. The ceiling was lost in shadow, but the cavern itself was not dark. It was filled with a pulsing, omnidirectional light that emanated from the very air. The light breathed, swelling and receding in a slow, steady rhythm that matched the thrumming in the walls. The scale was beyond human comprehension, a subterranean cathedral on a planetary scale. At the absolute center of this colossal space, hovering in midair without any visible support, was the Starforge fragment. It was not a jewel or a machine. It was a knot of pure condensed potential. A core of blinding white light was wrapped in swirling tendrils of energy that shifted through every color of the spectrum in colors that had no name. It was beautiful in a way that hurt to look at, and terrifying in its serene, untouchable power. It did not look like an object to be held or claimed. It was a presence, an entity that demanded acknowledgement, not possession. Commander Rennick and his mercenaries burst into the cavern behind them, their weapons raised. Rennick's eyes scanned the immense space for a half-second before locking onto the fragment. Avarice wiped every other expression from his face. He took a step forward, his hand outstretched as if he could simply take it. "There it is," he breathed, his voice full of a greed that blinded him to the palpable danger humming in the air. "Secure it, now!" Then a new voice spoke. It did not come from a person. It vibrated up from the stone beneath their feet. It resonated within the crystal of the walls. It hummed within the light that filled the air. It was a voice made of the cavern itself, a deep, ancient sound that was less heard and more felt in the marrow of their bones and the core of their thoughts. The voice was calm, immense, and utterly devoid of anything human. It had been listening, and now it chose to speak. The voice that answered Commander Rennick did not come from a mouth or a speaker. It originated in the stone beneath their feet, a deep vibration that traveled up through their boots and into their skeletons. It resonated within the crystalline walls, a harmonic hum that became words formed of pure vibration. It was the mind within the machine of the world introducing itself. It was Aetherian, and its consciousness was the cavern, the light, the very planet they stood upon. Its communication was not heard. It was felt, a pressure in their thoughts and a tremor in their bones. It addressed the intruders first. The voice turned its immense ancient attention toward Rennick and his mercenaries. It did not ask for their names or their intentions. It seemed to absorb their presence, to weigh the essence of their beings against some eternal standard. The judgment was swift and absolute. The voice held no anger, no passion. It simply found them wanting. Their greedy intent, their brutal disregard for the sanctity of the place, their hunger to possess, it all resonated as a discordant, ugly note in the harmony of the cavern. They were deemed unworthy without a single shot being fired. Then the focus of that impossible consciousness shifted. It turned to Nolan and Lara. The pressure of its attention was immense, a weight that threatened to buckle the knees. It saw them not as a unified front, but as the fractured, unlikely pair they were. It perceived the human soldier with his rigid protocols and his newfound conflicting loyalties. It saw the Valeran princess, a guardian bound by blood and duty, risking everything on a connection she could not fully explain. It saw their differing biologies, their clashing philosophies from minutes before, the fragile, nascent bond that stretched between them like a thread of spun glass. They stood together, but they were not one. A single question formed in the humming air, a thought query that landed in their minds with the force of a physical blow. It was simple, direct, and devastating in its implication. Why should I trust you? The question was not about their intentions, which it could likely already sense. It was a challenge of their fundamental understanding. It demanded proof that they comprehended the true nature of the power they sought to guard. It was asking them to demonstrate that they saw the Starforge not as a prize, but as a sacred responsibility. Rennick, infuriated by the silent exchange, by the dismissal, shattered the moment. He shouted into the humming silence, his voice a rasp of human impatience and greed. "Enough of this! We didn't come here for a lecture. That power is ours for the taking." He raised his weapon toward the fragment, a final, stupid act of defiance. He proved the Guardian's point with every snarled word, demonstrating an unworthiness so profound it was a perfect, toxic example. Aetherian's infinite patience ended. The energy in the cavern, which had been a steady, rhythmic pulse, suddenly convulsed. The light swirling around the fragment flared into a blinding maelstrom. The humming in the walls rose to a deafening whine. The stable ground seemed to lurch. The gentle, breathing luminescence of the sanctum became a raging storm of uncontrolled power, lashing out at the walls, the ceiling, the air itself. The test was no longer a question. It had begun, and from the chaotic surge of energy, it was immediately clear this was not an assessment of their strength or their firepower. The waves of raw creation energy crashing through the cavern demanded something else entirely. It was a test of sacrifice. Lara did not hesitate. As the chaotic energy of the Starforge fragment lashed out, Threatening to tear the sanctum apart, she stepped forward. There was no moment of calculation, no way of risk. It was an immediate instinctual act. She moved directly into the heart of the raging energy field, a lone figure advancing into a storm that could unmake stars. She did not raise a weapon or a shield. She raised her open hands and offered herself. She became a conduit. Her body, already luminous, ignited. The lavender glow that was her natural state flared into an incandescent white, so brilliant it was painful to witness. She was a vessel, a focal point for the fragment's runaway power. The energy that had been lashing out in destructive waves now streamed into her, drawn by her will and her unique connection to its source. She was attempting to contain the uncontainable, to channel the raw, screaming potential of creation itself through her own form. It was an act of incredible risk, a gamble that her body and spirit could withstand forces that had forged galaxies. Her motivation was clear in that single, selfless act. She did this not solely for Viora 7, the world of her birth and her duty. She did it for the galaxy Nolan represented, for the billions of lives on worlds she had only heard described, for the concept of humanity he had clumsily tried to explain by a crystalline lake. She was protecting his home too. She was making a stand for the entire fragile balance of known space. Athetherion, the consciousness of the cavern, watched. The ancient presence was a silent arbiter, observing her intent. It did not interfere. It did not aid. It simply witnessed the purity of her sacrifice, the absolute selflessness of her choice. The test was in action, not in words. The cost was immediate and horrific. The energy flooding into her was sheer, unadulterated agony. Every nerve ending screamed. Her muscles locked, her back arching under the torrent of power. It was a pain beyond any physical injury, a spiritual fire that sought to consume her from the inside out. Her face, visible for a moment in the blinding light, was a mask of pure, excruciating strain. Yet she did not fall. She did not break. She held on through a will forged in 1,000 generations of guardians. Through the blazing white light, her eyes found Nolan's across the chaotic cavern. The look was not one of pain, but of unwavering resolve. Her act was the answer to the guardian's question. It was a statement more powerful than any promise. She had demonstrated that she understood the responsibility. She was willing to burn herself out entirely to protect the power from those who would misuse it. She proved her worthiness not with words but with action that bordered on self-annihilation. But it was not enough. The fragment, a sliver of ultimate creation, demanded a perfect balance. It required a symmetry. Lara's Valor, in essence, her connection to the cosmic, was one half of the equation. It could receive the power, but it could not fully ground it. The chaotic energy continued to swirl, held at bay by her immense effort but not truly stabilized. The circuit was incomplete. A stabilizing force was needed, a counterweight to her stellar nature. It required an element of humanity, of earthly pragmatism and grounded spirit, to complete the connection and bring the raging power into harmony. The conduit was in place, but it needed an anchor. Nolan watched Lara burn at the center of the storm, a lone star containing a supernova. His training was a library of empty manuals. There was no procedure for this, no field guide for stabilizing a fragment of creation. Every instinct told him to stay back, to let the specialist handle the cosmic event. But the only specialist was her, and she was being consumed by the power she fought to control. The sight of her agony, the sheer will in her eyes as they found his, overrode a lifetime of protocol. He did not think. He moved. He crossed the cavern floor. The distance felt endless, each step taking him through waves of wild energy that crackled against his armor. The air itself resisted him, thick and heavy with power. Rennick and his men were frozen spectators, their violence rendered meaningless by the scale of what was unfolding. Nolan's entire world narrowed to the blazing figure of Lara and the space between them. He knew the pain that awaited. He had seen it tear through her. He knew his human body was not built for such forces. It didn't matter, he reached for her. His hand, clad in the stark practical black of his combat gear, moved through the corona of white fire surrounding her arm. The moment his fingers made contact, the universe exploded behind his eyes. It was not a metaphor. It was a sensory cataclysm. A fire that was not heat but pure, undiluted existence roared through every nerve ending. It was pain beyond anything he had ever known or could have conceived. A white-hot agony that promised to atomize him. His muscles seized. His vision whited out. His mind screamed for him to recoil, to escape the unimaginable torment. But he did not let go. He held onto her. His fingers tightened around her forearm, a soldier's grip anchoring himself to the one solid point in the dissolving universe. The act of holding on became his entire purpose. Through the blinding, all-consuming fire, he focused on that single point of contact, the feel of her arm beneath his hand, the reality of her presence. Their connection became a circuit. His humanity, his grounded earthly spirit flowed into the channel she had created. His pragmatic will, forged in duty and discipline, met her cosmic resolve. Human and Valeran, soldier and princess, two disparate halves of existence, separate and incomplete, fused in that searing moment of contact. Their individual wills did not vanish. They merged, weaving together into a single, unbreakable purpose. It was not a desire to possess the power or to wield it. It was the pure, selfless drive to protect it, to shelter it from the hunger of those who would break the universe to own it. Athetherion witnessed this. The ancient consciousness of the cavern felt the completion of the circuit, the perfect balance achieved not through force, but through sacrifice and unity. The chaotic energy that had been lashing the sanctum like a wounded animal began to still. The maelstrom of light softened, its violent surges smoothing into a gentle, rhythmic pulse. The deafening whine from the walls faded to a deep, contented hum. The raging storm became a steady, controlled flow, channeled perfectly through their linked forms. Their bond, tested in the crucible of ultimate sacrifice, had provided the final, irrefutable answer. They had proven their understanding through action, not words. They had demonstrated that the true nature of guardianship was not strength alone, but the willingness to become one with the burden. The energy receded, not like a wave pulling back from a shore, but like a great breath being slowly exhaled. The blinding light that had filled the cavern dimmed to a soft, steady luminescence. The deafening hum faded to a background vibration, a contented purr deep within the planet's bones. A profound quiet settled over the sanctum, a silence that felt earned. It was the deep stillness that follows a storm that has reshaped the landscape. The Starforge fragment hung at the center of the cavern, no longer a chaotic knot of screaming potential. Its light was calm, contained, pulsing with a slow rhythmic certainty. The terrifying power was now a gentle flow, channeled and stabilized, held in perfect balance within its ancient home. The immediate galaxy-ending threat had passed. The fragment was secure. The mercenaries were not prisoners. They were simply defeated. Their weapons hung useless in their hands. Commander Rennick stood frozen, his face a mask of stunned incomprehension. He had been bested not by a superior force or a clever tactic, but by a concept he could not process: unworthiness. The Guardians' judgment was absolute and inarguable. They had been deemed unfit to even approach the power they craved, their own greed rendering them irrelevant. They were spectators to a conclusion they had no part in. Nolan and Lara stood together, their hands still clasped. The searing pain was gone, replaced by a deep, resonating connection that felt etched into their very cells. They were forever changed by the ordeal. Nolan, the soldier of protocols, had willingly stepped into a cosmic fire. Lara, the guardian of light, had anchored herself with a human spirit. They had each crossed into the other's world and had been remade by the journey. Athetherion's presence was still there, a quiet hum in the air and stone, but its tone had shifted. The challenging, interrogating pressure was gone. In its place was a sense of deep, ancient approval. The Guardian had witnessed the proof it demanded and was satisfied. The fragment would remain where it belonged, but its stewardship was now different. It was no longer the sole responsibility of the Valeran bloodline. It was safeguarded by a new united bond, a fusion of human and alien will. But with the cosmic crisis averted, the immediate mortal consequences remained. They were left with the complex aftermath of their choices. Jenkins was alive, sitting huddled against a wall, his face pale. His fate was no longer a binary choice between treason and family. It was now a matter for military justice, a process that would have to weigh his coerced betrayal against the lives he endangered. It would be a test of the compassion Nolan had argued for, a chance for the system to prove it could be more than just punishment. Nolan finally turned to look at Lara. Her lavender glow had returned to its normal, subtle state, but her eyes held a new depth, a reflection of the fire they had both endured. He looked at her, and the careless joke he had tossed into the sparkling air of the valley felt like a lifetime ago. The words, "Will anyone even wed me?" echoed in his memory, but they were empty shells. The cynical armor had been burned away in the sanctum's light. The question was no longer a joke. It hung between them, serious and real and full of a promise that had been written in starlight and sealed in shared sacrifice. It was a question they would now have to answer together. The wedding was a cosmic event. It was held on the open plateau where Nolan had first landed, beneath the serene gaze of Viora 7's twin moons. But this was not a private ceremony. The guest list spanned star systems. Shuttles from Earth rested beside elegant Valeran skiffs. The air was filled with the mingled scents of alien blossoms and clean engine exhaust. It was a spectacle, yes, but its significance ran far deeper than pageantry. This union was a carefully orchestrated diplomatic act, a strategic move to cement an alliance born from crisis. The personal had become irrevocably political. Human and Valeran traditions were not simply performed side by side. They were intricately woven into a new ritual, a shared language of commitment. Nolan, in his formal military dress uniform, stood beside Lara, who wore robes of woven starlight. The ceremony began with a reading from an ancient Earth text on the nature of promise, its words translated and projected in soft, luminous Valeran script that hung in the air. This was followed by a Valeran bonding chant, a low harmonic hum from the attending royal family that resonated in the chests of every human present. They exchanged rings forged from Earth platinum and a rare, iridescent Valeran crystal that pulsed with a soft light. Each element was chosen for its symbolic weight, a deliberate merging of two cultures into a single, forward-looking promise. Nolan, the pragmatic soldier who once viewed the universe through the lens of protocols and threat assessments, became something new. He was a living bridge. His hand, holding Lara's, was a connection point between humanity and the Valeran, a testament that trust could be built across the deepest divides. He represented the best of Earth, its resilience, its capacity for adaptation, its honor. Lara, the celestial princess who had once guarded her world in isolation, became an architect. She was designing a new future, not just for her people, but for all who sought peace over conquest. Her vision and his steadfastness formed the cornerstone of a new era. The profound, terrifying truth of the Starforge fragment was known only to a select few, a handful of top-tier officials on Earth and the inner circle of the Valeran court. It was the galaxy's most closely guarded secret, protected by a wall of silence and mutual need. The public story, the one broadcast across the networks, was simpler. It was a story everyone could understand. It was a romance. A human soldier and an alien princess united against all odds. Their image, a man in black and a woman of light standing together under twin moons, became a beacon. It was a symbol of hope that spread across the galaxy, a promise that differences were not chasms to be feared, but bridges to be built. Their love was the public face of a much deeper peace, and it was a story the universe was desperate to believe. Their life became a mission of a different kind. The grand diplomatic gestures and interstellar summits were the public face of their work, but the true daily challenge unfolded inside the walls of their home. Raising a family meant navigating two distinct gravities, the literal, differing pulls of Earth and Viora 7 on developing bones, and the far more complex gravity of two cultures, two histories, two ways of seeing the universe. Every day was a negotiation, a gentle balancing act between human pragmatism and Valeran intuition, between solid ground and shimmering possibility. Their children embodied this blending. They were hybrids not just in biology but in spirit. Elric, the eldest, carried himself with his mother's innate diplomatic grace, a calm and regal presence even as a boy. He understood the weight of a name and the power of a quiet word, but this was tempered by his father's unwavering sense of duty and a loyalty to the people under his care. He was a bridge by nature, already fluent in the unspoken languages of both his heritages. Lyra, their daughter, possessed a mind that saw patterns where others saw chaos. Her curiosity was a relentless engine, pulling her toward the underlying mechanics of the universe. She was drawn with a scientist's passion to the safe, sanctioned studies of the Starforge's peripheral energies, the controlled harmonics that their home was built upon. She saw the poetry in the math. Orion, the youngest, was pure kinetic energy. He was all adventure, a boy forged from equal parts earthbound grit and Valeran wonder. He divided his time between navigating the low-gravity leaps across the crystalline rooftops of the Valerine city and trekking through the simulated wilderness of the human habitat sector. chasing thrills across both planetary landscapes as if they were a single, endless playground. Dinner tables became a microcosm of their union. A meal could feature a perfectly seared earth steak alongside a bowl of bioluminescent Valerine fruit that pulsed with a soft, edible light. The scents of roasted herbs and the subtle, sweet fragrance of alien nectar blended in the air. Family games reflected this duality. They might involve complex, low-gravity ball games in a dedicated chamber, the children tumbling and laughing in slow, arcing leaps, followed by an evening spent solving intricate light refraction puzzles, using handheld prisms to bend beams into specific patterns, a classic Valerine tool for teaching patience and spatial awareness. They were not just a family, they were a living, breathing experiment in unity. Every interaction, every solved argument, every shared joke was a data point in a new way of being. Their home itself was the ultimate symbol of this. It was a seamless architectural fusion. One room might have the solid, comfortable furniture of Earth, with soft fabrics and warm yellow light from lamps, while the next opened into a chamber with walls of living, gently glowing crystal that shifted color with the time of day. It was a space that felt both grounded and magical, a place of human warmth illuminated by Valerine luminous beauty, a testament to the fact that two worlds could not only meet but could build a new, singular home together. Their love story became a model for a galaxy searching for common ground. What began as a fragile alliance forged in a moment of crisis slowly grew into a permanent bridge, ending centuries of cautious isolation between their peoples. Starships that once only carried soldiers or scientists now carried artists, engineers, and families. The border between human and Valerine space softened from a fortified line into a vibrant, intercultural frontier. It was not a seamless process. The Union faced significant challenges and vocal critics on both sides. Hardliners within the Earth military complex distrusted the Valerine's non-linear technology and their intuitive governance, viewing their ways as opaque and dangerously mystical. Conversely, traditionalist Valerine elders feared the relentless pace of human expansion, the loud and sometimes clumsy way humanity reshaped worlds to fit its needs. They worried their serene culture would be diluted, swallowed by the sheer volume of human ambition. Protests sometimes flared on colony worlds, and political debates grew heated over resource-sharing treaties and cultural integration laws. But the success of their partnership was undeniable. The proof was in the tangible flourishing that followed. Trade routes established with Valerine guidance utilized stable gravitational currents humans had never detected, making travel faster and safer. Scientific collaboration led to breakthroughs in energy containment and organic material synthesis, blending human engineering precision with Valerine harmonic principles. Cultural exchange brought Valerine light sculpture to Earth galleries and human symphonic music to Valerine crystalline halls, each enriching the other. The alliance worked because it was practical. It made life better, safer, and more interesting for countless beings. Their children, living embodiments of this unity, naturally stepped into roles that furthered it. Elric served as a primary ambassador, his innate grace making him a trusted voice in delicate negotiations. Lyra headed a joint research initiative studying the safer applications of resonant energies, her mind perfectly suited to bridging two scientific paradigms. Orion led mixed crews on exploration vessels, charting new territories with a team that reflected his own dual heritage. They were not just their children. They were the first generation of a new kind of citizen. The secret of the Starforge fragment remained, its location and true nature known only to a trusted few. Its immense power was not squandered or hoarded, but used with utmost responsibility under their joint guidance. Small, carefully measured currents of its energy were channeled to heal damaged ecosystems on struggling colonies and to power deep space relays that strengthened galactic communication. It was a tool of preservation, not conquest, its guardianship the silent, sacred duty that underpinned the very public peace. In their later years, Nolan and Lara became living symbols of what was possible. They were less active in daily politics, their legacy secure. They often sat on the wide porch of their fused architecture home, watching a sky now graced by two suns. They would reflect on the unlikely path that brought them here, from a tense standoff in a Rainbow Valley to this quiet contentment. The soldier and the princess, the man of Earth and the woman of Viora, had built something that would outlast them. Somewhere in the cosmos, the consciousness known as Athetherian rested, content. The planet's heart beat steadily, its power safe, its guardians proven worthy time and again. It watched over them not as a sentry, but as a witness to a promise kept. Their tale, from a nervous joke to a shared sacrifice that saved worlds, was woven into the tapestry of the universe itself. It was not a story of conquest or epic battles, but something rarer, a story of love and duty fulfilled, a testament that the strongest bonds are often those forged across the widest divides. Nolan Hayes's offhand joke under alien skies became the first step into a destiny no mission brief could have predicted. Their journey proves the most formidable power in the cosmos isn't housed in any relic. It resides in a simple, profound choice: the decision to reach out, to protect what matters, and to forge love across the widest conceivable divides. This choice can rewrite a single life or reshape entire worlds, so consider the connections before you. What unlikely bridge might you build? What small act of courage could alter the course of your own world? Behind him, the sharp intake of breath was audible, followed by the unified, slick sound of rifles being raised. His squad formed a defensive half-circle, a wall of armored bodies and weapon barrels aimed at the luminous figure. Their training was a rigid script: unknown entity equals potential threat. The script demanded containment, assessment, and if necessary, neutralization. A tense, confused silence stretched, broken only by the low hum of the valley and the soft rustle of their gear. Lara's reaction was their polar opposite. She remained perfectly still, her posture relaxed. She did not flinch at the weapons pointed her way. Her calm was not the absence of emotion, but the presence of an immense, unshakable confidence. It was a composure so complete it seemed to push back against their alarm, creating a pocket of eerie stillness around her. She acknowledged the soldiers with a slight, almost imperceptible tilt of her head, a regal gesture that dismissed their hostility as irrelevant. Her focus never wavered from Nolan. She ignored the threat entirely. Her luminous eyes stayed fixed on him, the man who had spoken the words that drew her out. Her curiosity was palpable, a genuine and disarming intensity. "Your world," she began, her voice a melody that cut through the tension. "You call it Earth. Tell me of its waters." The question was so simple, so unexpected, it bypassed his soldiers' protocols entirely. It wasn't a demand for strategic information or a test of his intentions. It was a request for a story. Nolan found his own voice, the clipped, professional tone he used for briefings failing him. The rehearsed descriptions of Class M planets and standard biospheres felt hollow and inadequate. Instead, he found himself describing the deep, rolling gray of the Atlantic under a stormy sky. He spoke of the way city lights looked from orbit at night, a sprawling galaxy of human endeavor pinned to the darkness. He talked about the sheer, staggering scale of it all, the billions of lives, the ancient history. As he spoke, the images formed in his mind and a strange feeling settled over him. The things he described, the entire world he had left behind, suddenly felt incredibly small and incredibly distant. It was a world of problems and politics that had no purchase here, in this valley of living light. His second-in-command, Mara, broke the spell. Her voice was sharp, a blade of practiced caution cutting through the moment. "Sir, protocol. We are not cleared for this." Her words were a direct reminder of the line they were standing on, the one he was leaning over. She was voicing the warning his own training was screaming, the one he was consciously choosing to ignore. Lara turned her gaze to Mara, and for the first time, she addressed the group. Her expression was not offended but understanding, as if she comprehended their fear perfectly. "Your caution honors your duty," she said, her tone respectful yet firm. "But you observe from a distance and you see only surfaces. You catalog the shell and miss the heart." She looked back to Nolan, her invitation clear and undeniable. "I would show you the heart. Not as soldiers who watch, but as guests who wish to see." The words hung in the air. The first rule of the mission, the most fundamental directive drilled into them from day one, was to avoid first contact at all costs. The potential for cultural contamination, for unforeseen consequences, was too great. Every procedure, every line in their mission brief was built upon that singular, inviolate rule. Nolan looked from the unwavering muzzles of his squad's rifles to the open, expectant face of the princess. He made a choice. He gave a single sharp hand signal. Lower weapons, the first rule was broken. The mission, as they knew it, was over. The first true conversation happened under Viora 7's twin moons. Nolan stood watch by the lake, a vast expanse of hardened light that held the sky's reflection in a perfect, unbroken mirror. His assigned duty was perimeter security, but his mind was far from the mission protocols. The silence here was not empty. It was a presence. The twin satellites hung above, one a pale silver, the other a soft gold, casting a double shadow that made the world feel layered, unreal. He did not hear her approach. She was simply there, standing beside him at the water's edge, her form reflected perfectly in the crystalline surface, the professional distance he had tried to maintain, the wall of rank and species and protocol, thinned to a fragile membrane in that shared silence. She did not look at him but at their twin reflections, a human soldier in tactical gear and an alien princess woven from starlight, side by side in a frozen lake. Her voice, when it came, was quiet, a ripple in the still air. "On your world," she began, "how do you choose? How do two beings decide to bind their paths into one?" She turned her head, and her luminous eyes held his. "What is the nature of your bonding, your commitment?" The question landed with a weight that surprised him. He was a soldier. He dealt in coordinates and threat assessments, not philosophy. He tried to explain marriage, the legal contracts, the ceremonies with their varying traditions, the promises spoken before witnesses. His words felt awkward and strangely hollow, a dry recitation of custom that failed to capture the messy, hopeful, terrifying human reality of it. He spoke of love as a foundation, but the term felt insufficient, a small word for a vast and complicated force. Lara listened, her expression one of deep concentration. When he finished, she was silent for a long moment, considering the fractured pieces of his explanation. "For my people," she said, her gaze returning to the mirrored lake. "A bond is not a choice in the way you describe. It is a recognition, a resonance. It is like two notes separated across the cosmos that discover they are part of the same chord. The connection is not made. It is acknowledged. It is written into the fabric of a person's being, waiting to be found." She looked at him again, and her expression was utterly serious, devoid of any jest. "Meeting you," she said, her voice barely a whisper, yet clear in the absolute quiet, "feels significant. It resonates. It feels as though the universe itself intended this crossing of our paths." The statement should have unsettled his rigid, pragmatic view of cause and effect. Coincidence was statistical probability. Meetings were logistical outcomes. There was no grand design, only chaos and the order humans imposed upon it. Yet he could not dismiss her words as mere alien mysticism. They did not feel like a belief. They felt like a statement of fact. And against all his training, against every logical bone in his body, it resonated with a truth he felt in his core, a deep and inexplicable certainty that had been growing since the moment the light had formed around her. He looked at her, truly looked, and saw not an asset to be catalogued or a royal figure to be negotiated with, but a person, a singular, impossible person whose existence had just redefined his own. The mission's objective shifted irrevocably in that instant. It was no longer about gathering intelligence on a world. It was about understanding her,